With the 25th James Bond movie, No Time to Die, out in theaters, it's time to give you my James Bond ranking video. So let's get started. Welcome, movie watchers. Thank you guys for stopping by my channel. Today I'll be giving you guys my ranking for all 25 James Bond films. I will not be including the 2 non-canon James Bond movies. Let me know in the comment section down below, what is your least favorite James Bond film and what is your most favorite James Bond film?
Bond. James Bond.
So kicking off this ranking, coming at number 25 is Octopussy. I've never been a big fan of Roger Moore as James Bond. Some of the movies are enjoyable, but some of them just do not work. There's just so much comedy, and as the movies progress, he's definitely gotten older, and they don't really address that at all. But this movie just has some of the worst James Bond moments. Him dressed up as a clown. And who could forget the moments where he's swinging through the vines and there's the Tarzan sound going on? The moments in here just do not work. The story itself is not really interesting. They could have gone several different routes with an older James Bond, but by the end of Roger Moore's career as James Bond, they never really addressed him getting older. The comedy just started to really take over, and these films just suffered because they really couldn't be serious. Coming in at number 24 is Diamonds Are Forever. After a 1-movie break, Sean Connery returns for Diamonds Are Forever. This easily could have been a solid film because it did continue the story from On Her Majesty's Secret Service and James Bond wanting to get revenge. But that all happens within the first few moments of the movie, and then it becomes a whole new story. We could have had a developing story between the two movies, which would have added a lot of an emotional punch to the movie, but it just does not work. Sean Connery feels much older in the movie. It just does not work as Dr. No and From Russia with Love and Goldfinger did. Even Thunderball. This movie just feels tired and used. Coming in at number 23 is A View to a Kill. This is the last Roger Moore James Bond film, and there is some pretty decent action scenes within this movie, especially with the Golden Gate Bridge. Christopher Walken is pretty good in here. There's a really decent supporting cast within this movie. This has to have one of the worst openings to a James Bond film, with yet another ski moment, but having the Beach Boys song going over it does not match. When I did all the reviews for James Bond and I watched A View to a Kill for the first time in a long time, I was honestly taken back by just that moment. The problem with A View to a Kill and having Roger Moore once again be James Bond is they're not really offering anything new. Yes, it has a decent supporting cast and some really interesting action scenes. The story, the mannerisms from Roger Moore, his conflict with the villains, and the love interest as well just don't offer anything new. At least with No Time to Die, they had an epic conclusion to Daniel Craig's James Bond. They could at least done something for Roger Moore. This just feels like another average Roger Moore film that opens up with some skiing moments, have some villains, and it's just that. It's not a really enjoyable Roger Moore film. Coming in at number 22 is Moonraker. This has to be one of the most over-the-top, stupid James Bond film, but it's one of the Roger Moore ones that I feel is a little bit self-aware that it is taking place in space, and it's one of the ones that is very campy, but enjoyable as well. I feel like with the Roger Moore films, they've taken these outlandish ideas and different locations and different bold villains and kind of just ran with it. And some work, some don't work. And I feel like Moonraker is just kind of there in the middle of the Roger Moore films. I do think the setting of space could work for a James Bond movie today, but back then it just feels very odd. The set designs are not believable at all. At least this movie does have some fun moments, especially in regards to Jaws and some fun action scenes. The tone always remains the same. It doesn't really try to do anything different than being campy and ridiculous. So with that, I do appreciate that it's a entertaining James Bond movie at least, and the comedy is not really overpowering it all. It just kind of just feels average at times, but still a lot of fun. Coming in at number 21 is Die Another Day. Yes, this movie is very low on my list, but I do really enjoy Die Another Day for what it is. Is it a good James Bond movie? No. Is it a bad one? Yes. This movie is all over the place with its ideas, and the moments in here are easily some of the worst in a Pierce Brosnan and maybe even a James Bond movie. Parasailing on the waves at the end of the movie, the ice castle sequence, the Madonna song in the beginning over James Bond being tortured. A lot of it just feels out of place. This could have been a good James Bond movie because it had him captured in the beginning. He was tortured. That's something they easily could have explored for a majority of the movie. But instead, the movie tries to be really, really big, and it just comes off as really bad looking. Like, there is some horrible moments within this movie. But I would say that Die Another Day is my introduction to the James Bond movies. When we had Die Another Day released and I saw that movie, I went and rented all of the James Bond movies from the library, and that was my introduction to the series. So I kind of hold it special to my heart, but I do realize that it is very bad. Coming in at number 20 is The World Is Not Enough. The World Is Not Enough could have been a fun James Bond film. It starts off very well. It's got a really interesting idea, a decent villain, but that all got lost within this movie, and its execution, the way that they handled all of the moments and the villain, the love interest, it just really feels out of place. Denise Richards in here was definitely miscasted. She did not fit the character very well. The villain with Stockholm Syndrome could have been something really fun, but also the villain was miscasted as well. So there's a lot of potential for The World Is Not Enough. It's got really big action scenes, but they just don't really amplify the movie. And the moments with Denise Richards and our villain in the film, this don't mesh well together to bring this really interesting idea forth. And at the end of it all, it just becomes a really forgettable Pierce Brosnan film. Coming at number 19 is Live and Let Die. Live and Let Die has one of the best James Bond songs with Paul McCartney singing Live and Let Die. And the new James Bond played by Roger Moore. This is the least, I feel like, campy James Bond Roger Moore film. Like, the humor is there, but it's not overpowering. The new kind of setting I thought worked, and some of the things that they explored within the movie is handled very well. There are some things within this movie that do work. There's some pretty decent action scenes with the iconic speedboat scene at the end of the movie, even if it goes on for just a little too long. But Roger Moore in here really got a chance to show that he can bring that comedy to it and make some of the more action scenes work. But eventually, some of the comedy really eventually took over in the upcoming Roger Moore films. But with this one, there was some questionable moments in regards to some of the race things that they covered and some of the womanizing moments that this movie just kind of felt uncomfortable to watch. But I do like the kind of change of pace for the villains and the setting in it. But it's still one of the worst James Bond movies. Coming in at number 18 is The Man with the Golden Gun. It was so awesome to see Christopher Lee in a James Bond movie as the villain too. And I feel like he really played up the role as Scaramanga. So I really like the villain within here and the idea of the Man with the Golden Gun as well. I like how they utilize James Bond within this movie acting as an assassin, but there's just so many different storylines that are going throughout the movie that none of them really have a chance to fully develop throughout the movie. And that really shows because there is potential for Christopher Lee's James Bond villain to work. There's fun moments at the end. It's feeling a little more campy compared to the previous outing, Live and Let Die. but they don't really bring forth the strong stories because there's just so much going on in the movie that it overall just feels like a weak film with a lot of potential and a really decent James Bond villain. But by the end of it, it just feels incredibly average. Coming in at number 17 is Thunderball. This is the fourth Sean Connery James Bond film, and it's nowhere as good as the previous three films. The previous three films had a really good, strong story with villains. And yes, this movie is bigger with its action. We have James Bond with the jetpack, there's underwater sequences, but you don't feel like there's a lot at stake with this movie. I don't feel like these villains, I don't feel like the villain in here, Amelia Largo, is menacing at all. I don't feel like there's any danger to this movie. And so it just kind of has this easy breezy feel to it that never really raises the stakes. But in my regard, Sean Connery is the best James Bond, and he plays the part very well in this movie, but the story never really allows for him to be truly involved with the story and interacting with the cast. Coming at number 16 is Quantum of Solace. This is the second Daniel Craig James Bond film, and it does start to continue the events from Casino Royale with Vesper and Mr. White. But then it also introduces Mr. Green, and there's really no strong connection between Mr. Green and the events from Casino Royale. So it feels like it's trying to develop that continuing story, but also the story with Mr. Green is overpowering the film, and it's not interesting at all. I think Mr. Green is by far one of the least interesting James Bond villains. And so we get all those moments with him when they easily could have expanded on Vesper Lynd's story and the events after Casino Royale and some of the emotional moments for James Bond. But instead, we have this story that just does not work. The action is there, but the story is nowhere as gripping as that previous entry. Coming at number 15 is Spectre. Spectre is just a little bit better than Quantum of Solace. I like Christoph Waltz as Blofeld. I do not like the connection between him and Bond. I think it's some of the worst connection between Bond and a villain. It once again is trying to build off of Casino Royale, but it does it in a little better way. We have Spectre being introduced in the film. We have interesting stories centered around, are MI6 still relevant? But I think that kind of just gets lost in the moments with Spectre. This movie has some decent action scenes involving him and saving Léa Seydoux' character Madeline, and the opening is very strong, but I think the way that they handled the villain and the backstory just feels very unnecessary. And a lot of the ideas do get lost in the movie. And similar to Quantum of Solace, they're trying to continue the stories with Vesper Lynd and Casino Royale, and they're trying to do something new and bigger as well. And the connection just is a little bit stronger, but still not as gripping. Coming at number 14 is Tomorrow Never Dies. This is Pierce Brosnan's second James Bond film, and there's some really good chemistry between him and Michelle Yeoh, and some really intense action scenes amongst the two, especially one with the motorcycle. The villainous plot in here is a little bit different from other James Bond villains we have seen. This one we have Jonathan Pryce trying to control the news, the media, all of that. When we have, previous James Bond villains that want to blow up the world and take control of everything, this one just feels a little bit different and welcomed too. I think Jonathan Pryce was excellent as a James Bond villain. So you really do have that sense of urgency within this movie with some really good action scenes from beginning to end of the film. And Pierce Brosnan once again shows that he's a really good actor to play Bond. He's suave, he's confident, he doesn't really sacrifice some of the scenes for comedy. Those comedic moments are implemented nicely. They have those one-liners. The use of gadgets in here are really great. This is just an entertaining Pierce Brosnan film. Coming in at number 13 is The Spy Who Loved Me. This is a much better performance for Roger Moore as James Bond. I feel like he really tapped into the role this time around. There were still some comedic moments. For the most part, he was more intense as the character, and that allowed for some of the action scenes to really take over and have the movie have a strong focus on its plot. And the introduction of Jaws in here, one of the most iconic villain henchmen in here, really provides some intense moments and a challenge for Bond. Every time I watch this film and Moonraker, I'm always wondering, how can anybody really defeat Jaws? He's absolutely massive, but he's not as comedic and corny this time around, especially when he was in Moonraker. He's much more tame in The Spy Who Loved Me. But this film had an interesting conflict between Bond and the Bond girl, and kind of the results of their relationship and the unknown as well. Also, just a really more tight script this time around for a Bond film with some really fun action that makes it a decent Roger Moore film. Coming in at number 12 is You Only Live Twice. I absolutely love You Only Live Twice. It is kind of just in the middle for this ranking video. It has one of my all-time favorite Blofeld appearances, and the plot in here is just, it's very campy. And when you think of these spy movies and James Bond, you think of like these big villainous plots, evil layers, and big over-the-top villains. That is what You Only Live Twice is, and I absolutely love it. This is one of the films that I watched a lot growing up because of the set design, the big evil lair, Blofeld. It's just so entertaining, but it does it in a way that it's not over-the-top, like campy or ridiculous. It's kind of got like that nice blend of the Sean Connery action and the serious moments mixed in with the over-the-top villainous plot that just makes this film so enjoyable to watch. Coming in at number 11 is License to Kill. This is the second Timothy Dalton James Bond film, and the last one, unfortunately. I really liked Timothy Dalton as James Bond, and I really like Living Daylights as well. This one has a very personal mission for Bond. He relinquishes his license to kill, disobeys his orders, and goes on a mission of revenge when his best friend's wife is killed. This is all really set up within the first like 20-ish minutes of the movie, and right away you understand what the plot is, the characters, the character motives, why Bond is doing what he is doing, and that's all filled in with a lot of great action scenes from Timothy Dalton, who really shook things up when it came time to his role in The Living Daylights and after Roger Moore. This is not a comedy I don't see any hints of it being a campy movie. It's much more grounded, and we see that in License to Kill. These have some of the most violent James Bond scenes, with that deep pressure scene that's really kind of horrific to watch. But this is a really entertaining James Bond film. It's heavy on the action, less of the comedy. Timothy Dalton is really great, and it's very personal to him, which makes it, you know, a film worth watching for the mission and watching James Bond try to get revenge. Coming in at number 10 is For Your Eyes Only. I like how this film opened up with Bond visiting the grave of his wife. I think that we always should have, you know, at least mentioned his wife from On Your Majesty's Secret Service and have some continuing story throughout. But from there on, after that was all set up and had Blofeld in the film as well, the action scenes seem a little more tense, and Roger Moore is more of an action star in this film rather than Live and Let Die. He is more fierce, and he's more involved with a lot of things, and he's not afraid to get dirty, and that's what I did appreciate about this film. And also, you know, it did have some comedic moments, but I never felt like it was a comedy compared to films like Octopussy and A View to a Kill and Moonraker. It's much more grounded compared to other Roger Moore films. Still has that amount of humor thrown into it because it is a Roger Moore film. Coming in at number 9 is Goldeneye. Goldeneye is the first Pierce Brosnan film, and they set it up very nicely. This is the best Pierce Brosnan James Bond film. This one is significantly larger than any Roger Moore film and the Timothy Dalton movies. He's very believable as James Bond. One of my favorites for James Bond compared to Sean Connery and Daniel Craig. I think that he does a great job portraying all of the different elements from the previous Bonds, like Sean Connery, Roger Moore, Timothy Dalton, and George Lazenby. He kind of takes everything and makes his own Bond, and I really did love it. With those big action scenes and the one at the end with the satellite, it's really entertaining to watch as an action movie, but with a story with the villain with Sean Bean, the connection between him and Bond is something that's handled very well. Compared to films like Spectre, where Bond had a connection to Blofeld, which did not work, this has a strong connection between the two and has a story that's worth watching and is more personal to Bond. And I really love how they kind of handled all of that, mixed in with those really fun scenes. Coming at number 8 is On Her Majesty's Secret Service. George Lazenby as Bond is always something that you forget about because he only appeared in one James Bond film. But this has to be one of the best looking James Bond movies. The cinematography, the set designs, locations, all of it just is very elegant and handled so well. And we have a different story that Bond wants to settle down, but that doesn't work out for him. His wife is killed. And so we have this movie that has some of these emotional moments that sometimes George Lazenby doesn't really handle because he wasn't an actor beforehand. So, he's got room to grow as an actor. But I would love to see him, be in like 4 or 5 James Bond films because this one is so good. I love the story in here and how he is so attentive to the minor characters in here and cares a lot about people. He's a more meaningful, careful James Bond that we've seen before with Sean Connery, who was a womanizer, and we kind of see that with George Lazenby, but as a kind of different style. And so we have Blofeld in here, which was really good, and we have Blofeld in here. The conflict between him and Bond had a lot of tension in here. So On Your Majesty's Secret Service is a film that is very underrated, but when you create like this list of Bond films, you think of all the Daniel Craig, Pierce Brosnan, all the Sean Connery ones, and then you forget about George Lazenby, and that just sucks because he's a talented actor, and this could have been a good run for him as Bond. Maybe we could have cut down on the Roger Moore films and maybe got rid of the last Sean Connery, and maybe things could have been different. But for this one film and having one performance, he did a great job. Coming in at number 7 is The Living Daylights. Timothy Dalton was very welcomed as James Bond. More grit, more grounded, serious performance, and I just loved it. This film just kind of bounced around from different locations. I think they should have just really honed in on one central location. But Timothy Dalton really brings those action scenes to life in James Bond, The Living Daylights. And so you have all these tense action scenes that are just flowing throughout the movie, and he's just there to provide those really good scenes. This film was released in 1987 and has a strong 80s feel to it, especially with the plot as well with Afghanistan. But the action, the hair, the look of Bond, it just screams the 80s, and I loved it too. And I loved watching this film. It took me years to actually watch the Timothy Dalton films because growing up I was huge on the Sean Connery movies, and then eventually all the Roger Moore films, and then getting introduced into all of the Pierce Brosnan films. And so then I kind of skipped over the George Lazenby On Her Majesty's Secret Service and the 2 Timothy Dalton films. So it took me a while to, really appreciate Timothy Dalton as Bond, but he was very welcomed, and they should have done more because there was a huge gap between the last one, License to Kill, and Goldeneye. They could at least fit one more in there. Coming in at number 6 is From Russia with Love. From Russia with Love took everything that Dr. No had set up with the mannerisms of Bond, the classic one-lines, the quotes, what he likes with his martinis, everything about Dr. No, and really brought it to a whole new level. It has bigger action scenes, a tight script, and conflict with an espionage feel that just makes it really thrilling to watch. I do prefer Dr. No. You're going to see that on this list just a little bit higher up. But From Russia with Love is a very iconic James Bond movie. They have the fun villain of Rosa Klebb, the mention of Blofeld in here. From Russia with Love has, many more villains and some memorable villains as well. But I like how they just took everything with Dr. No and then brought it to a whole new level. It was a quickly paced story that made this just a fun follow-up to Dr. No. Coming in at number 5 is Skyfall. Skyfall dealt a lot with the past, with James Bond's past, learning what happened to him as a kid, looking at Silva, played by Javier Bardem, and his connection to M and his past, and even looking at M's past as well. And what I like about this film is that it took Bond and realized that he's older and he's not as spry as he used to be. He has to be reinstated. He has to go through these physical tests, and that's what they should have done with Roger Moore, because he was old and they just never addressed it. This time around they did, and it's interesting to see his progression as Bond throughout the movie, and him kind of getting back into the game. So Skyfall has a really good opening with on the train sequence, and the song by Adele works. But from there on, watching him with Silva and Silva's presence without actually him being there is so strong. This is a solid James Bond film. Coming at number 4 is No Time to Die. No Time to Die is the most emotional James Bond film with an opening that's the closest thing we could get to a horror film. And from there on, we see Bond dealing with trust issues and disappointment from characters, and it's something we really don't get to see in a Bond because he's opening himself up and letting the emotions really take over. Rami Malek as the villain is great. I don't think they utilized him too much, but I really liked the presence within the movie, and Madeline Swan and James Bond's connection definitely worked this time around compared to Spectre. Christoph Waltz once again is great as Blofeld, but there's just so much emotional moments within this movie. Action scenes that flow so great and are so gritty and intense that the 2-hour and 43-minute runtime does not feel like it. And it's just a fastly paced James Bond movie with the right moments that hit for Daniel Craig's last outing. Coming in at number 3 is Dr. No. This is the first James Bond film and one of my personal favorites. I've seen this movie a few times in theaters, and I always enjoy the opening scenes, the iconic James Bond score, and Dr. No as a villain. But watching James Bond and everything being set up for this character, him saying his name and what he likes for his martinis, and just everything we know about James Bond was set up within this movie. But it's also a lot of fun. There are some campy moments within the movie, especially when they get to Dr. No's island, but it's got a big villain plot that's just really entertaining to watch. But watching Bond and him trying to get information to lead to Dr. No, that journey within itself is a lot of fun. So being the first James Bond film, it set it up very nicely. Yes, the action scenes are outdated compared to where we are now with No Time to Die, but for when it was released, they were intense. And I think they handled them very nicely with the technology they did have. But Dr. No for me will always be one of my favorites. Coming at number 2 is Casino Royale. This was the first Daniel Craig James Bond film, and they set the character up nicely in this movie. This is more of a reboot for it. The action scenes just pop within Madagascar, and all of the casino scenes with the poker sequences, those are intense just with its own compared to like even the action scenes. It's so fun to watch that. But Lashif is a really fun villain, and you can see that there's a lot at stake for himself as well. And if he doesn't get things working, if he doesn't get things done, things will happen to him. So watching him struggle as well is a unique way to approach a villain. But Daniel Craig is intense as Bond. He's very vulnerable when it comes to dealing with Vesper Lynd. Vesper Lynd is one of the few James Bond girls that actually have a strong connection to Bond, her and Madeline Swan. But I really loved this movie. This was the first James Bond movie I saw in theaters, and it's just so memorable. It's action-packed from beginning to end, and Daniel Craig really gives this performance his all. But coming in at number 1 is Goldfinger. Goldfinger is my personal favorite James Bond film, and it's even in my top 20 films of all time. I love Goldfinger as a villain. The song focuses on him, really sets up those intense scenes with Goldfinger, and that he's going to be a menacing villain. And I love the big villainous plot in here. It's not for like taking over the world, it's for his own personal gain, which makes him a lot of fun. The henchman of Oddjob is very sinister, and with his hat could just cut through anything, makes for some really entertaining moments. But Bond is feeling more confident in this role. The script is very tight. It's taking those iconic scenes and running with it while offering a really fun James Bond story, and watching Bond just go through all of it and being very confident in the role, and him as an agent is always thrilling for me to watch. And Oddjob, Goldfinger, Bond, all three of them mixed together, pussy galore, everything in here is just mixing together to be the best Bond film. So there you guys have it, all 25 James Bond movies ranked worst to best. How would you rank them? Let me know in the comment section down below, and stay tuned for more up and coming James Bond content like this. My name is Just Watches Movies, and you guys stay classy, YouTube.